The emergency room was full. Every chair taken. Every hallway crowded. Every nurse moving like they were already 10 steps behind the night. And in the middle of it all, my 6-year-old daughter was struggling to breathe. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Have you ever had that moment where something inside you whispers that something is very, very wrong, but everyone around you insists it's nothing? That was the moment I was sitting in. My name is Elena Carter. I'm 34 years old, a librarian at Maplewood Elementary, and a single mom to the most energetic 6-year-old girl you could ever meet. Her name is Maya. And on that night, Maya sat curled against my side in a hard plastic chair in the Riverside Medical Center emergency room, her small fingers gripping the sleeve of my sweater like it was the only stable thing in the world. Her breathing wasn't loud. That's what made it so unsettling. It was quiet, tight, like every breath had to squeeze through something invisible. Inhale, pause, exhale. Too slow, too careful. I kept watching her chest rise and fall, counting the seconds between each breath without even realizing I was doing it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Was that too long? Across from us sat my family. My mother, Linda Carter, 62 years old, arms folded tightly as she observed everything with the calm confidence of someone who believed she had already figured out the situation. Next to her was my older brother Greg, 40. Tall, broad-shouldered, always convinced he was the rational one in every room. His wife Tracy sat beside him scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing up with the detached interest of someone waiting for a delayed flight. And every few minutes, one of them would say the same thing. She's fine. It's probably anxiety. Kids get dramatic when they're tired. Greg leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and gave me the kind of reassuring smile that felt more like dismissal. Elena, look around, he said quietly. This place is packed. If something was really wrong, they'd take her in already. Behind him, the television mounted high on the wall played muted news footage while captions crawled across the screen. Some story about flu season. Respiratory infections rising. Hospitals overwhelmed. The irony of that didn't escape me. But still, I hesitated. Because the truth is, when enough people around you insist that you're overreacting, doubt begins to creep in. Maybe I was panicking. Maybe Maya really was just tired. Maybe I was turning a small problem into something huge. Then Maya shifted against me. Her small voice came out thin. Mom? I leaned down instantly. What is it, baby? She pressed her hand lightly against the center of her chest. It feels tight. Just 2 words. But something about the way she said them made a cold feeling spread through my stomach. Tight. Not sore. Not scratchy. Tight. I rubbed her back slowly. You're okay, I whispered, even though I wasn't completely sure. About 40 minutes earlier, a triage nurse had called Maya's name. Carla Jennings. Mid-40s, tired eyes, but kind. She had taken Maya's vitals quickly behind a small curtain near the entrance. Temperature normal. Pulse slightly elevated. Then she clipped a small monitor onto Maya's finger. The number on the screen blinked. 93. Carla had frowned for a second. Just a tiny one. Then she typed something into the computer. We'll get her back as soon as we can, she said gently. And then we were sent back out to the waiting room. With a chart. A simple paper chart placed into a thin plastic holder. It was now sitting on the counter at the front desk among a stack of others. Just one more patient waiting. Minutes passed. Then more. A man with a bandaged hand was called back. A teenager with a sports injury limped through the double doors. A coughing elderly woman followed soon after. Each time the doors opened, I could hear the chaos inside. Phones ringing. Machines beeping. Voices calling for supplies. But Maya stayed in the chair beside me, still breathing too carefully. Greg leaned back and stretched. Elena, remember when you thought your dog had rabies because it sneezed twice? Tracy laughed. My mom shook her head with a small smile. You've always had a vivid imagination. I forced a weak smile. But inside, something twisted tighter. Because I kept replaying something Maya had said earlier that afternoon. At the time, it seemed small. Forgettable. We had just gotten home from school. She had dropped her backpack on the kitchen floor and walked toward the couch. Halfway there, she paused, pressed her hand under her ribs, and said quietly, "Mom, that hurts." I had asked if she pulled a muscle on the playground. She shrugged, said maybe. And then 5 minutes later, she was drawing horses at the kitchen table like nothing had happened. So I let it go. Now, sitting in that waiting room, that moment replayed again and again in my mind. And every time it did, it felt a little more important. Then suddenly, the double doors opened. But this time, something was different. The man who walked out wasn't a nurse. He wasn't a receptionist. He wore dark blue surgical scrubs, his sleeves rolled slightly above his wrists. Tall. Serious. Moving with the focused energy of someone who didn't waste time. Later I would learn his name. Dr. Adrian Keller. 47. Trauma surgeon. And he wasn't supposed to be in the waiting room at all. He walked straight to the front desk. Didn't say much. Just reached over, picked up a chart from the stack, and flipped it open. I didn't realize at first that it was Maya's. But then his eyes stopped moving. His gaze locked on a single line of text. And in that moment, something changed in his expression. His jaw tightened. His posture stiffened. Like someone had just turned on a warning light only he could see. Slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes moved across the room. Past the crowded chairs. Past the television. Until they landed directly on us. On Maya. Then he looked at my family. And in a voice that cut cleanly through the noise of the entire waiting room, he asked one simple question. Who said she could wait? In that moment, every conversation in the room seemed to stop. And suddenly, I realized something terrifying. The surgeon had just seen something on that chart that no one else had noticed. Who said she could wait? The question hung in the air like someone had just pulled a fire alarm. For a moment, nobody in the waiting room moved. Not the man holding an ice pack to his wrist. Not the tired nurse behind the desk. Not even the television murmuring silent headlines above us. Everyone looked toward the surgeon. And then toward us. My stomach dropped. Because his eyes weren't confused. They were alarmed. Have you ever seen a professional, someone who deals with emergencies every day, suddenly look worried? That's the kind of look he had. My mother spoke first. Linda Carter never liked silence. Well, she said, adjusting her purse on her shoulder, the nurse said the waiting room was full. The surgeon's gaze didn't soften. He looked back down at the chart in his hands, scanning the notes again, like he was making sure he hadn't misread something. Then he looked directly at me. You're her mother? I nodded quickly. Yes, I'm Elena. He stepped closer, crouching slightly so he could see Maya better. Up close, the fluorescent lights made her skin look paler than usual. Her small chest rose, then fell. But the rhythm wasn't right. Too shallow. Too careful. How long has she been breathing like this? He asked. I swallowed. I'm not sure. It got worse tonight. He turned another page on the chart. His finger tapped a line written in hurried handwriting. Did she say anything about chest pain? That word hit me like a spotlight. Chest pain. I hesitated. And that hesitation lasted just long enough for doubt to creep into the room. Well, I said slowly. Earlier today, she mentioned something hurting under her ribs. My brother Greg sighed behind me. Kids say stuff like that all the time, he muttered. The surgeon didn't react to Greg at all. His attention stayed locked on Maya. Maya, he said gently, can you take a deep breath for me? She tried. You could see her little shoulders rise. Her chest expanded halfway. Then she stopped. Her face tightened slightly, like the breath had run into an invisible wall. Dr. Keller's expression hardened. He stood up immediately. Okay, he said quietly, but with sudden urgency. We're not waiting anymore. Everything started moving fast. He turned toward the nurse's station. I need a room now, he said firmly. The nurse behind the desk blinked in surprise. Doctor, we're currently. Now, he repeated. Something in his voice changed the energy instantly. Within seconds, 2 nurses were at our side. A wheelchair appeared. Machines were rolled aside. And suddenly the waiting room that had felt frozen for nearly an hour was exploding with motion. Maya looked up at me confused. "Mom?" "It's okay," I said quickly, brushing her hair back. "They're just taking us to see a doctor." But my heart was beating faster now. Because doctors don't interrupt emergency rooms for nothing. As the nurses helped Maya into the wheelchair, Greg stood up. "What's going on?" he asked. The surgeon glanced briefly at him. "What's going on," he said calmly, "is that this chart suggests she may have a serious breathing issue." The word serious landed like a stone. Tracy finally looked up from her phone. "Wait, what?" But Dr. Keller was already pushing the wheelchair toward the double doors. "Come with us," he told me. The doors swung open. And suddenly we were inside the part of the hospital the waiting room never sees. Bright lights. Phones ringing. Machines beeping. Doctors moving quickly between curtained rooms. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic. Maya was rolled into a small treatment room. A nurse clipped the oxygen monitor back onto her finger. The number blinked, then settled. 92. Dr. Keller noticed it instantly. "What was it in triage?" he asked. 93, the nurse answered. His jaw tightened, dropping, even if only by one number. I stood against the wall trying to stay out of the way as nurses attached monitors to Maya's chest. One placed a blood pressure cuff around her tiny arm. Another slid an oxygen tube beneath her nose. Maya looked overwhelmed. Her eyes found mine immediately. "Mom?" "I'm right here," I said. Dr. Keller flipped through the chart again. "Did she have any recent injuries?" he asked without looking up. I shook my head automatically. "No." But the word barely left my mouth before something flickered in my memory. 2 days earlier. The playground. Maya climbing the monkey bars. A small fall. Nothing dramatic. She landed on her feet, mostly. But she had stumbled forward afterward. At the time she laughed it off. I hadn't thought about it since. Until now. Dr. Keller looked up. "Any falls?" he asked again. This time I hesitated. "Maybe," I said slowly. My brother groaned quietly. "Elena." But I kept going. "She fell off the playground bars at school 2 days ago." The room went quiet. Not dramatically. Just that subtle shift when medical professionals suddenly start connecting dots. The surgeon straightened. "How far did she fall?" I'm not sure. Maybe 5 feet?" The nurse checking Maya's oxygen looked up. 91 now. Dr. Keller nodded once, like a puzzle piece had slid into place. "Okay," he said. Then he turned toward the nurse beside him. "Let's get a chest x-ray immediately." My stomach tightened. An x-ray? For a fall that happened 2 days ago? Greg crossed his arms. "That seems a little extreme," he muttered. Dr. Keller looked at him calmly. "In children," he said, "symptoms from chest trauma can appear hours later. Sometimes longer." Then he turned back to Maya. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The slight uneven movement of her chest when she breathed. One side rising just a little less than the other. Dr. Keller noticed it too. And the look that crossed his face made my heart sink. Because whatever he suspected, it wasn't something small. The nurse began wheeling Maya's bed toward the imaging department. I walked beside her, holding her hand. Behind us, my family followed more quietly than before. No more jokes. No more dismissive comments. Just the squeak of hospital wheels on polished floors. And a growing tension none of us could ignore anymore. Because somewhere between the waiting room and this hallway, this had stopped being a precaution. It had become an emergency. And minutes later, when the X-ray images appeared on the screen, Dr. Keller's expression changed again. But this time it wasn't confusion. It was certainty. And what he saw in that scan would explain exactly why Maya should never have been sitting in that waiting room at all. What could possibly show up on an X-ray that makes a surgeon go from cautious to completely certain in a matter of seconds? That was the question echoing in my head as I stood in the dim imaging room, watching Dr. Keller study the screen. Have you ever tried reading a medical image? At first glance, it just looks like shadows and bones. Gray shapes layered over darker gray shapes. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic. But to someone trained to read it, every line means something. And right now, Dr. Keller wasn't blinking. He leaned slightly closer to the monitor, one hand resting on the edge of the desk, the other pointing at Maya's scan. The radiology technician beside him shifted uneasily. "Do you see it?" Dr. Keller asked quietly. The technician nodded slowly. "Yeah, I see it." My heart started pounding. "See what?" From across the room, Greg tried to lighten the tension. "So, broken rib," he said with a half shrug. No one laughed. Dr. Keller turned toward me. "Elena," he said carefully, "I'm going to explain this as clearly as I can." That sentence alone made my stomach drop. Doctors don't start explanations like that unless something serious is coming next. He pointed to the screen. "You see this space right here?" I stepped closer. On the image, I could see Maya's rib cage, the curve of her spine, the faint outline of her lungs. But on the right side there was a strange dark pocket. Empty space where something should have been. "That," he said, "is air outside the lung." I blinked. "I don't understand." Dr. Keller nodded patiently. "It means her lung has partially collapsed." The room felt like it tilted. "Collapsed? How does a lung collapse without anyone noticing?" Behind me, Tracy gasped. Greg frowned. "Wait, like, fully collapsed?" "Not fully," Dr. Keller said, "but enough to affect her breathing." He zoomed in on the image. "You see this thin line here? That's the edge of the lung. Everything outside it should not be air." My mind was racing now. "But she's been walking around," I said. "She went to school today." "That happens sometimes," he replied. "Especially in children." He tapped the screen again. "The fall you mentioned likely caused a small tear in the lung tissue." The words landed slowly. "A tear. Air leaking. Building pressure." Dr. Keller continued. "Air escapes from the lung and becomes trapped between the lung and the chest wall. We call that a pneumothorax." The medical term sounded clinical, almost calm. But the tension in the room told a different story. "How serious is that?" I asked. He met my eyes. "If untreated, it can become life-threatening." Greg shifted his weight. "But she's been sitting in the waiting room for almost an hour," he said. Dr. Keller nodded. "Yes, and that's exactly why we need to act quickly now." My throat tightened. "Quickly how? What do we do?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "We relieve the pressure." A nurse beside him had already started preparing equipment. Metal trays, sterile packaging, thin tubing. The sudden movement in the room made everything feel urgent. Maya sat quietly on the bed, looking from face to face. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could feel the tension. "Mom," she said softly. I walked over and took her hand. "I'm right here, sweetheart." Dr. Keller knelt beside the bed so he was eye level with her. "Maya, we're going to help your breathing feel better," he said gently. "How?" she asked. He smiled slightly. "By letting some air out that got stuck where it shouldn't be." It sounded simple when he said it like that. But the tray beside him told me the real procedure would be anything but simple. Greg spoke again, this time less confident. "Is surgery really necessary?" Dr. Keller shook his head. "Not surgery in the traditional sense." Then he held up a thin tube. "This is called a chest tube." The words made my stomach twist. "We insert it between the ribs to release the trapped air. Once the pressure is gone, the lung can expand normally again." My fingers tightened around Maya's hand. She squeezed back. Hard. "How long does that take?" I asked. "About 30 to 40 minutes. 40 minutes. That suddenly felt like the longest amount of time in the world. Dr. Keller stood up again and looked at the scan one more time. But then something else caught his attention. His eyes narrowed. He leaned closer to the screen again. The radiology technician followed his gaze. "Is that?" the technician started. Dr. Keller didn't answer right away. Instead, he zoomed in further on the image. The dark space around the lung wasn't the only thing visible now. There were faint streaks extending upward through the center of the chest. Dr. Keller exhaled slowly, and that quiet breath sent a new wave of fear through me. "What is it?" I asked. He turned back toward me. "There's another detail here I didn't expect." My heart sank. "Another detail? What does that mean?" I asked. He pointed to the screen again. Some of the air appears to be moving toward the mediastinum. I stared at him blankly. The word meant nothing to me, but the tone in his voice meant everything. Greg looked confused. Is that bad? Dr. Keller answered carefully. It can be. Then he explained. The mediastinum is the space in the center of the chest where the heart and major blood vessels sit. My pulse quickened. And if air collects there? I asked. His answer came quietly. It can start compressing those structures. The room fell silent. Compressing the heart. That sentence echoed in my mind like an alarm bell. Dr. Keller looked back at the nurses preparing the equipment. We need to relieve the pressure before it spreads further, he said. Then he turned to me again. Elena, I need your consent to begin the procedure immediately. A clipboard appeared in my hands. Forms. Medical terms. Legal language that blurred together because my mind was racing too fast to read any of it properly. All I could see was Maya sitting on that hospital bed. Small. Scared. Trying to breathe. I signed the paper. Dr. Keller nodded once. Okay, he said. We're going to take care of her. The nurses began moving the bed toward a procedure room down the hall. Bright lights waited inside. Sterile equipment. Doctors preparing gloves and masks. And as they wheeled Maya through the doorway, she looked back at me again. Mom, are you coming? I followed right behind. But what none of us realized yet was that the skin still contained one more detail. A detail that would make the surgeon even more concerned. And it was something he wouldn't notice until the procedure had already begun. What happens when doctors fix the obvious problem and then discover something even more dangerous underneath? That's the question none of us were prepared for as Maya's bed rolled into the small procedure room. The lights inside were bright. Blindingly bright. Everything in the room was stainless steel, white plastic, and quiet urgency. Monitors lined one wall. A tray of sterile instruments sat beside the bed. Have you ever walked into a hospital room where everyone suddenly starts moving faster? That was the energy in the air. Controlled. Focused. But urgent. A nurse guided me to a chair near the wall. You can stay, she said gently, but try not to get too close to the sterile field. I nodded, barely processing the words. My attention stayed locked on Maya. She looked tiny on that hospital bed. Her legs barely reached the middle of the mattress. The oxygen tube rested beneath her nose now, and the monitor beside her displayed the numbers that suddenly meant everything. Heart rate, 118. Oxygen saturation, 90. Each breath still looked too careful. Too shallow. Dr. Keller stepped up to the bed wearing gloves now. A surgical mask covered most of his face, but his eyes were steady and focused. Maya, he said softly, we're going to give you some medicine to help you relax. She nodded slowly. Her small fingers searched the bed until they found mine again. I held on. Tight. One of the nurses injected medication through a small fore they had placed in her arm. Within a minute, Maya's shoulders relaxed slightly. Not asleep, but calmer. Dr. Keller turned to the team beside him. Local anesthetic, he said. A nurse handed him a syringe. He explained each step quietly, mostly for my sake. I'm going to numb the area between her ribs, he said. She may feel pressure, but she shouldn't feel pain. I nodded even though my throat felt too tight to speak. The room became very quiet as he worked. Antiseptic cleaned the skin along Maya's right side. Bright orange under the lights. A sterile drape was placed around the area. Then Dr. Keller carefully injected the anesthetic. Maya flinched slightly, but the medication worked quickly. Moments later, he picked up a small scalpel. My heart pounded. Have you ever tried to stay calm while watching doctors perform a procedure on your child? It's like every instinct in your body is screaming to step in, even though you know they're helping. Dr. Keller made a small incision. Precise. Quick. Then he reached for the chest tube. A thin, flexible plastic tube designed to release trapped air. Okay, he said quietly to the nurse beside him. Ready. The tube slid carefully between Maya's ribs. And then something happened immediately. A faint hissing sound. Like air escaping from a tire. One of the nurses glanced at the monitor. Oxygen, 91. Then 92. Dr. Keller nodded. That's the pressure releasing. Relief washed through the room. Even Greg, who had been standing stiffly in the corner, exhaled loudly. So that's it? He said. Problem solved. But Dr. Keller didn't answer. Instead, he watched the monitor carefully. The hissing continued for several seconds, then slowed. Another nurse connected the tube to a small drainage system. The trapped air continued escaping through the line. And slowly, Maya's breathing began to change. Her chest rose deeper now, more evenly. Oxygen climbed. I felt tears blur my vision. It was working. Dr. Keller secured the tube with stitches and placed a bandage over the insertion site. Good, he said quietly. But then his eyes moved back to the portable imaging monitor the technician had rolled into the room. The earlier X-ray was still displayed. Something on that image pulled his attention again. He stepped closer, zoomed in. The technician joined him. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. That silence felt different. Not relieved. Concerned. I wiped my eyes and stood. What is it? I asked. Dr. Keller didn't answer right away. He studied the screen carefully. Then he looked back at Maya. Then back at the image again. Finally, he spoke. Her lung is reinflating, he said slowly. That's good, right? Greg asked. Yes, Dr. Keller said. But there's still something here that doesn't quite make sense. My stomach tightened again. What do you mean? He pointed to the faint streaks we had seen earlier. The ones spreading through the center of the chest. That air shouldn't have traveled this far already. The technician frowned. You're thinking mediastinal air? Dr. Keller nodded once. The words sounded clinical. But the tension in the room returned instantly. Greg looked confused. I thought the tube fixed that. It releases the pressure around the lung, Dr. Keller said. But if air has already moved into the mediastinum, we need to monitor it very closely. I felt the fear creeping back. What happens if it keeps spreading? Dr. Keller answered honestly. In rare cases, it can compress the heart or major blood vessels. The room went silent again. But then he looked back at Maya. Her breathing was already steadier. Oxygen, 95. He gave a small reassuring nod. For now, she's improving. Relief washed over me again. But something about his tone suggested we weren't finished yet. Maya stirred slightly as the medication made her sleepy. Her eyes fluttered open just long enough to find me again. Mom? I'm right here, I whispered. Her fingers squeezed mine. Then she drifted back into a light sleep. Dr. Keller finished adjusting the drainage system. We'll move her to the pediatric observation unit, he said. We need to monitor her for several hours. Greg finally relaxed his shoulders. So she's going to be okay? Dr. Keller looked at him calmly. I believe so. That should have been the end of the tension. But then he asked one more question. And the moment he said it, my stomach dropped again. He looked directly at me. Elena, he said, when exactly did Maya fall from those playground bars? I thought back. 2 days ago. Dr. Keller's brow furrowed. Because that timeline didn't match what he was seeing on the scan. And the quiet words he said next sent a chill through the room. Then something about this injury isn't adding up. How could an injury from 2 days ago suddenly turn into a breathing emergency tonight? That question was now hanging over the entire room. Dr. Keller stood beside the imaging monitor, arms folded, studying the scan again like it contained a puzzle piece no one else had noticed. Maya slept lightly on the bed behind him. The sedative had relaxed her enough that her breathing finally looked smoother, the rise and fall of her chest no longer so strained. The oxygen monitor now read 96. Just 15 minutes earlier it had been 90. So yes, the chest tube was working. But the surgeon's expression told me something else was bothering him. Have you ever watched someone solve a problem and then suddenly realize the explanation doesn't quite fit? That's what this looked like. He turned toward me again. Elena, I want to go over the timeline one more time, he said. I nodded quickly. Okay. You're certain the fall happened 2 days ago? Yes, I said. Monday afternoon. At recess. And Maya seemed fine afterward? As far as I knew, I said. She finished school that day. He glanced down at the chart. Did she complain about pain that evening? I thought back. Monday night. Homework at the kitchen table. Dinner. Cartoons before bed. No, I said slowly. Not that I remember. Dr. Keller rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Greg shifted beside the wall. So kids can have symptoms delayed, right? He said. You said that earlier. That's true, the surgeon replied. But usually not like this. He tapped the screen again where the X-ray was displayed. A pneumothorax from blunt trauma typically appears within a few hours. My chest tightened. But Maya didn't have breathing problems until tonight. Exactly, he said. The technician beside him scrolled through the imaging again. More angles of Maya's chest appeared on the screen. Bone structures. Soft tissue. The shadow of the lung slowly reinflating now that the pressure had been relieved. Then Dr. Keller pointed to a faint line near the upper lung. Here, he said. The technician leaned closer. Could that be a bleb? I had no idea what that meant. But something about the word made my stomach twist again. Dr. Keller nodded slightly. It's possible. Greg frowned. What's a bleb? The surgeon turned toward us. Sometimes small air blisters form on the surface of the lung, he explained. Most people never know they're there. And occasionally they rupture. The realization hit me instantly. You mean, her lung could have collapsed without the fall? It's possible, he said. But the fall may still be related. Trauma can trigger a weak area to rupture. So suddenly there were two possibilities. The fall, or something that had already been developing inside her lungs. Neither option felt comforting. Dr. Keller looked back at Maya. She shifted slightly in her sleep, her breathing steady now thanks to the chest tube. That would explain the delay, he murmured. Greg rubbed the back of his neck. So, what does that mean long-term? The surgeon answered calmly. We'll monitor her lung overnight. Most cases resolve completely once the air is removed. That sounded reassuring. But he hadn't finished. If the air continues to leak, he added, we may need to consider additional treatment. The words additional treatment echoed in my head. What kind of treatment? I asked. In rare cases, surgery to repair the leaking area. Surgery. The word landed like a weight in my chest. Maya was 6. 6-year-olds aren't supposed to need lung surgery. But Dr. Keller quickly added, right now that's just a possibility, not a likelihood. Still, the idea was there now. Floating in the room. The nurse finished securing the drainage system attached to Maya's chest tube. Air bubbles moved through the clear chamber with each breath. That's a good sign, she said. It means the air is escaping. Dr. Keller nodded. Then he turned back toward me. Elena, I'm glad you brought her in tonight. I blinked. My family thinks I overreacted, I admitted quietly. He shook his head. You didn't. Then he said something that made the entire room go silent again. If you had waited a few more hours, the pressure in her chest could have increased significantly. Greg looked uneasy now. How bad are we talking? Dr. Keller didn't exaggerate. In severe cases, the pressure can push against the heart. The sentence hung there. Heavy. Which is why, he added, when I read that chart in the waiting room, I knew she shouldn't have been sitting out there. I thought back to that moment again. Him picking up the chart. Reading a single line. And everything changing. What did you see? I asked. The note about chest pain and breathing difficulty after a fall. He shrugged slightly. Those symptoms together can't wait. My mother, Linda, had been unusually quiet during all of this. But now she finally spoke. Well, the nurse didn't seem worried. Dr. Keller's voice stayed calm. Emergency departments are extremely busy places. Sometimes subtle signs get overlooked. It wasn't blame. It was simply reality. He checked Maya's monitor again. Heart rate, 104. Oxygen, 97. Her breathing looked almost normal now. Relief started to settle into the room. The crisis seemed to be passing. Or at least slowing. A pediatric nurse arrived with a transport bed. We're ready to move her upstairs, she said. Dr. Keller nodded. Pediatric observation unit. The team carefully transferred Maya to the new bed. The chest tube system moved with her, the clear chamber still bubbling quietly. I walked beside her as they rolled the bed into the hallway. The chaos of the ER seemed less overwhelming now. But my mind was still racing. Because Dr. Keller's earlier words kept replaying. Something about this injury isn't adding up. As we reached the elevator,